We're fortunate to be here in the nation's capital because there are so many opportunities to learn and places to go and visit. And one of those places that I always recommend to friends and family that are coming to Ottawa or are here and have never visited in the first place is the Bytown Museum. And they have some exciting news to share with us here today. I'm joined by Grant Vogl, Senior Manager of Collections and Exhibitions at Bytown. Welcome to the show.
Great, thanks for having me.
Let's talk about, for those that have never visited the Bytown,
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about the idea behind the museum.
So the Bytown Museum was founded in 1917, and it's actually Ottawa's oldest community museum. And we tell kind of Ottawa's story based around the canal and around the growing of the city. So we talk about kind of the federal aspect of Ottawa, but we also really focus on the local aspect of the city and talk about the people and the events and stories that shaped the city from the early days of Bytown to present day.
Grant, when you say community museum, what does that mean exactly?
So we're a local non-for-profit registered charity. We get funding from the City of Ottawa, but we are not run by the City of Ottawa. And we're obviously a lot smaller than, say, the Canadian Museum of History, who are great friends of ours, but we operate on a much different level, of course.
I mentioned off the top exciting news to share because you've gone through a renewal project, which you were telling me earlier was probably a 5-year timeline, but that timeline got bumped up thanks to some great partnerships. Tell me about the renewal.
Yeah, so during the closures of COVID, we were all working from home. We were looking at projects we could do at home or back burner projects, and one of those was reviewing and editing and updating kind of the narrative text throughout our permanent gallery exhibition.
Okay.
Which is kind of the way that it tells the story of Ottawa through till the end of the First World War. And we've really been focusing on creating a more diverse and inclusive space, engaging with the community, and also kind of looking to decolonize the narrative that we're discussing because, as you know, most museums are working towards meaningful truth and reconciliation as part of those recommendations. And so we actually worked with community members from Kitigan-Zibi and from the Pikwakanagan, Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation to review those texts, remove some colonial language, insert Indigenous language and stories and history throughout the museum, as well as working on some other diverse stories to include as well. And
you got some Indigenous artists involved as well. You have 2 beautiful murals that they worked on. Tell me about that experience and watching that come together as a team. It must have just been a magical moment.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier part of that funding. So we were lucky enough to get around $100,000 from Federal Development Ontario, as well as the Ottawa Tourism Relief Fund, to take a project that we'd been looking at parsing out over a number of years and making it come to life in 1 year. So with that money, we were able to complete the review of the text and also engage with a designer to lay out new panels, which are trilingual, so they're actually in French, English, and Algonquin, and have those fabricated, and also to engage with artists to create these mural installations. So we actually worked with 3 sisters from Kitigan-Zibi to animate the space, introduce visitors to the permanent gallery, and weave Indigenous history throughout the museum. Again, not just kind of at the beginning of the story, but through the whole story of Ottawa.
You mentioned, the permanent gallery. So when people pay a visit now to the Bytown Museum, what's that experience like? What will they see, and what knowledge will they gain?
Yeah, so people who visited the museum this summer, which was the first summer we'd been open in a couple of years, there will be quite a bit of visual change. Again, there's 2 large mural sections. All of the narrative panels that guide you through the story of Ottawa have been redesigned. They pop out with nice color and design and some wayfinding along with that. So there'll be elements that people recognize if they've been through, and of course the story in the bare bones doesn't change, but the number of stories of diverse communities, not just Indigenous, but the Black community, the Syrian community, stories of women, stories of children in the area. We're really working very hard to kind of make it a more inclusive space for everybody.
Yeah, and part of that is the collections that you have, right, and the artifacts that are part of that storytelling, which is, just amazing to sort of follow through. It's always wonderful to have those visuals along. You're still doing it by appointment only, am I right, during the winter?
Right. So we had a pretty good, although short summer season this year, and so right now for the winter we are open for groups by appointment only. Okay. So we've kind of switched back to what we were focusing on during the closures, which was virtual programming. So we have our virtual tour, we have our social media, and our virtual guided tour and lecture series. And so our first virtual lecture of this year is actually this Thursday evening at 7 p.m. And it's the story of bar culture in Ottawa. So,
interesting.
Yeah, so we'll be welcoming the manager of the infamous Chateau Lafayette to speak to that. And the Laff is actually the oldest continuously operated tavern in Ottawa.
Yeah,
so.
My understanding, they were the first to get a liquor license. Is that right,
yeah,
the Lafayette?
Opened in 1849, and right after they opened, the Stony Monday riots occurred, basically just outside their front door. So there's some pretty amazing history surrounding that, and so we'll be doing that lecture as well as two others over the course of the winter to kind of engage with our audience online before we shift again and focus to our in-person
Yeah,
programs.
and I guess talking about probably some of those older bars, I think Carlton Tavern comes to mind, and the Prescott and places like that.
Yeah.
Grant, really appreciate the time today, and congratulations to you and your team. I know how incredibly excited you are, and you at home should be excited as well. You can visit the website, of course, to make an appointment to visit the museum. We'll be right back at it.